Alright, are we live? Current theory is that we are live, but the chat is stuck. Maybe the bot just isn't working. Anyway, welcome back. I apologize in advance, I have a cold, and so I might be a sniffly mess. But let's try this and see what happens. It looks like we're streaming on YouTube. Does not look like we're streaming on Twitch. Maybe the transcoder is having trouble. Yeah, there might be something wrong with this. Let's debugging it live. Looked like we were having an alright time with the YouTube stream, but Twitch and maybe the notifications, which are on the same machine, didn't seem to be working. Oh, is this a problem on my end with Twitch? I'm seeing a screenshot on Twitch, but it was still claiming I was offline. Yeah, I'm gonna say that maybe this is just a web UI glitch because I'm seeing a stream on Twitch, so... Alright, well, maybe both the Twitch UI and the chatbot are broken, but the actual stream is working. In which case, welcome to the stream. Looks like the Twitter bot's working, so maybe it's just the Gitter chat bot that isn't working. Alright, well, sorry for the rockier than usual start, but I think we can actually start now. So, hi, welcome back to the stream. I've got some coffee, I've got a cold, so I don't know how much I'm going to be able to tolerate this or how much you're going to be able to tolerate this, but let's see what happens. Yeah, and this was just going to be another kind of software-oriented stream, so if you don't like the software-oriented streams, you can tune out now, sorry. But, yeah, I was still hacking around on this robot game from 1984 that I've been porting to the modern web, basically. And I made some interesting headway on that in just the past couple of days, just in between stuff I've been streaming about. So on the previous stream, you may have, if you caught any of that, and if you caught what was going on, I was doing something a little bit weird where I was going into this game's original data files, specifically the files that were used for the combination cutscene player / main menu, and figuring out how to both extract graphics from them and repackage them with a different combination of images. So that was basically this whole plan to try to take the menu and splash screen from the game and actually extract it from the WebAssembly portion and implement that entirely in web technologies. You know, well, WebAssembly is a web technology, but implement entirely in things that are a little faster to load. Even though I am using caching pretty aggressively, just caching data in a local service worker, it still takes a while to actually compile and JIT all the WebAssembly code. There are some things I could do to improve that, like there's a more experimental web extension to WebAssembly that lets you cache, it's like structured WebAssembly objects or something like that. Some like internal parsed representation of the WebAssembly. Haven't implemented that, that might improve things, but currently my approach has been to try to move those early portions of the game into web so that I can hide the loading time behind the menu and the splash screen. And so it's debatable whether the original version of the splash screen or my version is better. I'll show you both, and you can decide. They're slightly different now. But the splash screen is now implemented entirely in CSS. So it doesn't even need the JavaScript to load. You could just like save the HTML page itself, and it has inlined CSS and inlined images that get it as far as running through the entire splash screen. And then as soon as the JavaScript loads, it can just flick a switch in the CSS and show an image that's already loaded, which is then the menu, and it can animate a cursor. So the other goal here, besides improving loading times, was to set the stage for nicer UI in some ways. So the menu was something which worked in my emulation, still works if you go back to the right branch, but now I didn't really want to be relying on it. I wanted to be able to, for example, the original menu, because it was based on just like kind of a superficial modification to sort of what looked like a movie player application sort of thing. Like you can't really, it doesn't even support like arrow key navigation. It says on the bottom of the menu, press space to select, press enter to go, or something like that. And that's like literally all you can do. If you have a joystick, you can move up and down with the joystick, but with the keyboard, it doesn't even support like the basic keyboard navigation you would expect, and never did. And I would like to be able to just like click on the menu items and have that work, and of course that's a major departure from what the original game supported. So if I'm going to be re-implementing that from scratch, I might as well do that in the web technologies rather than writing the 16-bit code and doing it inside the emulation layer, because then it'll load faster and it'll be more usable. So that was my theory. And the other thing I was interested in doing was to set the stage for some further UI work for loading and saving files, stuff like that. And so that's already, it's like already kind of coming to that, where I'm not making any specialized UI, but I am having to think about how multiple UI modes come together and share input events and share the display and share the DOM. So that's something else I'm thinking about. I've also been certainly keeping my eye out for opportunities to use some other kind of framework that could handle some of this for me, but so far it's all been pretty low-level JavaScript, and I've been kind of preferring just to learn the raw browser technologies first before jumping to some large framework. There are some frameworks I've looked into, like Pixie.js for games, and I'm kind of familiar with React, and I could see some opportunities to use it here, but for the moment it's all pretty much vanilla JavaScript, but with Webpack to package it and Babel to compile it. So I've been pretty happy with that, but there might be room for improvement here and there, especially now that we're getting into more complicated event dispatch kinds of things. Let's see if I can get the auxiliary cat camera on view. So yeah, so this is our other project that, admittedly, I have not been working on enough. It's been quite usable, but has a pile of bugs that really could use fixing, and it has some opportunities for interactive chat control that are currently going unfulfilled, so that'll be a fun thing to work on. I've just been mildly obsessing over this robot game and trying to get that to the point where it's a little more usable. So we'll do some more of this soon. Maybe just spend a moment with the cat here. Specifically on this stream, I can show you kind of the current status of where that kind of menu / input / image packing rewrite has gotten us to. So just like a little status update. But the thing I thought we could actually try to make some progress on is implementing Gamepad support. So this is something I wanted to do, and actually just in the last day I got a GitHub issue, like a feature request from someone else who was interested in this too, so it seems like good enough excuse to actually do it. And so I was looking into the Gamepad APIs and familiarizing myself with those and actually making sure I had something that supported them. I think right now the only gamepad I really have handy for this purpose is a Steam controller, which is a pretty nice gamepad, but it's also not just like a plain USB HID standard thing. So on the bright side, it supports some interesting remapping features, and it's quite capable. It has a lot of input mechanisms. It has, accelerometers and touchpads and haptic motors and whatever. But it does require their Steam software to be installed, and for that to actually act as an input router and deliver kind of emulated joystick events to other applications. So, I would have liked to also demonstrate this with just a plain old USB gamepad, but the one of those that I have around here is the one that I'm using to drive the robot around, so I'll save that for a different stream sometime in the future. This cat is pretty chill. Alright, I also was able to take this opportunity to discover the W3C standard gamepad. I don't know, and it's funny to kind of laugh at how primitive the drawing is, but I mean, in all seriousness, I am actually really happy that there is this level of standardization in the Gamepad API. The unfortunate thing is that this isn't mandatory, because, most, PC applications, for example, would have a really hard time actually discovering what the physical meaning is behind a particular joystick button. Every single gamepad standard that's come along, since the early days of PC gamepad support, including the USB HID standard, have tried in some way to take the sort of wild west of different manufacturers just mapping buttons to whatever they want and standardize it in some ways. And so HID, the USB Human Interface Device standard, which is what all keyboards and all USB gamepads use, it provides a way of describing what the usages are for buttons, and so that's useful. But in a lot of APIs, by the time the game gets a chance to see what the data is about, it just has a list of buttons that are numbered and don't really have any other information. So it can be kind of frustrating. So then you see a lot of games that kind of adopt de facto standards, a lot of games are just coded to an Xbox 360 gamepad, and if you don't have an Xbox 360 gamepad, you have to remap it somehow. So it looks like what the Web Standards Committee, I don't know who exactly was behind this, but it ended up on the W3C. So these folks decided to adopt kind of this platonic ideal of a gamepad and say this is the one standard gamepad, and you don't have to use it, but if you do any kind of remapping, we highly encourage you to map it into this format. So then you end up in two different situations. Either the application, in this case the web browser, knows enough about the gamepad to convert it to this and you get something nice and standard, or it's just still kind of a huge mess. And so I'm seeing both of those actually right now. I've got this HTML5 gamepad tester site, which is pretty handy. I'm running it in 3 different browsers on the same computer. So I've got Safari, Firefox, and Chrome here. Wake up my Steam controller. So, have to wake it up. So part of the specification here is that the browser shouldn't see the gamepad unless you've interacted with the gamepad and the web application at the same time, basically. And in fact, it looks like Safari wasn't allowing gamepad input in the background, which is interesting. That seems like a good security feature, but other browsers seem to allow gamepad input in the background, which I can see that having its uses for multiplayer gaming, maybe. But you can also see these buttons are showing up very differently. So the web gamepad spec, they encourage you to put the more basic, kind of first buttons, in the first slots, basically. And so here's the A button, which I would argue is the first, maybe because it comes at the top of the alphabet. And so over here in Chrome, it's mapping to B0. Over here, it's B11. Over here, it's B0, which is great because it's this is different in all 3 browsers. That's not obvious from this button, but you'll see soon. So here's button A, here's button B. You can also see, maybe if you can read that gray and black text, that Chrome is claiming that the mapping is standard. So Chrome is claiming that, okay, I as an application, or Chrome as an application, knows that this is a gamepad that it can identify the buttons for, either because it's read the HID descriptors or it's using the Steam API or something. I don't know how it actually does that right now. But it's saying this is the standard mapping. So if I go through this, this should actually map to that kind of W3C platonic ideal gamepad. So let's see if we can verify that. Oh gosh, sorry, I'm so sniffly. Oh, that's great. Thank you for the hint. Dean points out that there was a GitHub, Gitter, GitLab token invalidation recently because of a security breach, and I've probably got to re-log in the bot. That's probably what it is. I'll do that when I'm offline. Alright. Oh gosh. Can we make this a little smaller? I want something like the keyboard zoom, but for contrast. It's like, sometimes I appreciate the subtlety in graphic design, but sometimes their gray on gray is a little too dim. Okay, so what do we have? We have buttons 0, 1, 2, 3. Cool. Where does that go next? Buttons 4 on top left. Cool. 5 on top right. 6, 7. This is nice. We didn't have to do anything in the browser except, ask for a gamepad, and here it is, standardized for us. So this is 8, 9. What's next? Where's 10? Oh, 10 is the trigger being pressed. And on here, it's the trackpad over here being pressed. That's 11. So then 12, 13, 14, 15 are the D-pad, which are emulated with the left touchpad on the Steam controller. It's pretty nice, though. It's got, I don't know, some of you are probably familiar with these. The Steam controller is pretty nice. These two are both touchpads with one physical button, but, it can tell where you're touching it, register that as a press. Likewise over here, it'll register that as an emulated D-pad press. And with the other mappings or with the Steam native API, you can configure these to do fancy things. I really like the virtual keyboard where you can use 2 thumbs to kind of tap, kind of like you're using a phone keyboard. So let's see, that was 11. Yeah, so I think, and then this one in the middle. Oh, so it looks like we don't get access to 16 because that goes right to Steam, where you can see the temporary Steam account I had to set up for this. Oh gosh. I didn't want that. Yeah, so I think, can you set that button up to be application stuff? I think I have to go back into that noisy mode to, let me mute the audio from this computer, because I don't really want to deal with its sound effects right now. I'll have to remember to unmute this later so I can hear the game. Okay, so you go into Steam. Yeah, this is the thing I don't like about this controller, is I wish there were nicer ways of configuring it. Maybe somebody knows of a better way to configure this, but as far as I know, the way to do this is to use the settings in Steam's, I'm a TV for playing video games mode, which is kind of frustrating. So, desktop configuration. Can you... I don't think you can remap that. I thought there was something for this in the actual preferences UI, though. Oh yeah, this one maybe. Can I turn this off? Does that do what I want? Blah. That still just opens Steam. Okay, maybe I can't reprogram that button. Whatever. Looks like aside from their vendor button thing, it's appearing to be standard. So let's compare that to the other 2 browsers I've got open here. Okay, if I leave Safari in the front, then we can see them all. So far, it looks like Safari is treating these as kind of standard, but it's reporting the mapping as none, so maybe it's not very confident about this. So here's AB, XY. All right, and then the top buttons. Oh. Yeah, so that's where it starts to diverge. So 0 through 5 are as per the standard, but then these kind of trigger buttons here, those turn into axes 4 and 5. And this is 9 and 8. So these are kind of mapped right, but they're backwards. This is 6 instead of 16. That's 7 instead of 11. So yeah, this is not standard, but it's like kind of close in some ways. And then in Firefox, it's just all over the place. So like A is up here at 11, 12. So the problem with this is if I mapped this from like button 0 to like the main action button in the game, like where would button 0 even be? Like at least on these other mappings that makes sense, but button 0 is the D-pad. That's not good at all here. So, you know, I don't know how far I want to go with this, but like it seems like some kind of remapping facility in the game might be useful. In this case, I could just use the Steam controller's remapping. If I wanted to play this in a particular browser, I could just remap the game controller to fit that. But yeah, that is kind of frustrating, right? So I think maybe the first iteration of this, I'm going to assume the standard mapping, but you know, in the future, to make this work better, either the browsers are gonna have to fix their stuff, or I'm gonna have to add some kind of remapping facility. I mean, that is useful for, you know, user configurability anyway, but that also relies on a lot of UI that is, like, I'm still, like, so deep in technical debt with UI right now because I don't even have, like, loading and saving, so that'll need some time. All right, let's close these testers. All right, I guess maybe the next thing I wanted to do is just to show those two different versions of the intro and then some of the changes I've made recently. So this browser here happens to have the old version of the site still cached. So this is using service workers for offline caching, and the caching that they do is pretty intense. So if you just reload the web page, you will not get the new version. If you reload the web page, that will eventually cause the background service worker thread to notice that there might be a new version and download it, but then it doesn't actually install the new version until you close all the tabs that are open to that domain on your browser. So from like a web app deployment point of view, it's really nice, but like if you're just trying to get the very latest thing, then sometimes the caching can cause you to unexpectedly have the old thing. But yeah, once it's actually deployed, you know, just like reloading it will cause it to notice that the hashes on the server side are different and download the new resources. But for it to actually install that, you'll have to like close your browser tab and reopen it. So this is a browser tab I have not closed and reopened since it loaded the old version. So if I reload it, or if I just like go to the address here, that actually doesn't do anything. If I hit reload though, you can see the old version of the splash screen. So this starts out with a delay spinner. Right here, you can see we're lucky because this browser and this computer are both pretty fast. So this is like 1/5 of a second, if that. I don't know. It's a pretty short load delay. The slowest device I have that works with this site is my iPad, and it's more like a 2-second or so loading delay. So just like visiting the site and then seeing nothing for 2 seconds is pretty bad. Also, a lot of, like, if you try to fetch this with the Fetch as Google tool, and it can like render what Googlebot thinks your page looks like for like search purposes, and you know, it'll just show up as a spinning thing because it never actually loads. And you know, so like it would be nice if basically the intro is just an intro, like an image and an animation. It'd be nice if we didn't have to wait for like 1.5 MB of code to download and compile just to do that. So in this case, that's what we're doing. We're compiling 1.5 MB of code and then emulating a bunch of DOS and CGA stuff, and then pulling frames out of a buffer, which eventually go into a canvas, and that's how the whole thing is implemented. And it's actually made up of, so this game is made up of several exe files, but everything you're seeing right here is menu.exe. So that has both kind of a actual menu thing and these cutscenes. Sound is still off, so this is going to be silent. Normally it would have some like pretty old school beepy noises going on here, but it plays these frames out of this data file, which has RLE compressed CGA frame buffer chunks in it, basically. Play some noises, and then transitions to a different exe file. So this is like the old version. If you want the code for that version, it's in a branch now. There's a old emulated menu branch. I've tried when I do like major things like this, so you can also see the pre-high-level graphics. If you go there, that's back when everything was going through the emulated CGA. Right now, only the cutscenes are basically going through the emulated CGA. Yeah, so it's irising pretty fast. Also, this iris effect is going quite a bit faster here than I think the game would have actually played on like period hardware. And I've deliberately sped up the game in some places just to make it a little bit easier to play. I think the natural speed is a little bit sluggish, but not very much. I mean, going from like 8 frames a second to 12 frames a second, right? If you go to like 20 frames a second, that would be too fast to play probably. But this like iris effect, you know, I thought it seemed a little nicer going faster. I've been playing with the speed. I think the current version actually is a little bit slower than that. So here's a different browser which happens to have the current version cached. So here, no loading spinner. You immediately get a high resolution iris effect there, a couple of layers, and now you get a menu that follows the mouse. You can also use arrow keys, you can use space. So it's kind of like the original menu, but this is all animated using CSS now. And so you can still scroll down here. This also required fixing kind of a misfeature where in this version, all of the sizing had to be done in JavaScript, because I hadn't figured out the right CSS trick to get the kind of aspect correct sizing that I wanted here, but with the help of a friend who knows a lot more CSS than I do, they set me in the right direction, and this seems to be doing it right. And if you save just the HTML for this, so you just save this raw HTML file and open that, then, oh, that's interesting. That's not what I was expecting. I don't know why it gave me the loading spinner there. This is the old version. I don't know why it saved a copy of the old version. That's a little odd. Let's just use wget to make that point. So if you just load the raw HTML, then it plays through the whole splash screen, and then it'll sit here forever. But all the sizing works out just fine. So that seems like a good, decent fallback. Like if you don't have any JavaScript, then it just looks like, hey, somebody decided to put the splash screen on its own domain. Why not? But yeah, if you actually have WebAssembly, then it works. If you have JavaScript but not WebAssembly, then you get an error message after the splash screen. So then this follows your mouse. I pretty much had to completely, so this is a very intense, like, kind of redesign of the way the menu actually works, but the pixels it produces are pretty much the same. Yeah, so the way the menu actually originally draws is a little bit weird. So I think I mentioned it uses kind of like a movie player sort of file format. It's a bunch of frames which are all compressed with run length encoding. So any contiguous runs of the same pixel can be turned into just like a code that says splat this many copies of this byte. It also has the ability to skip portions of memory. There's a command in the file that just says point at this location in the frame buffer and start writing. So if you do that, you can leave data in the frame buffer from a previous frame and just write new pixels. So for this entire intro animation, this is just kind of loading frames and pasting them over the previous frame. But the way the menu is implemented, it would first load a frame that consists of this. So like the whole menu with the cursor in that first position. It would load that and kind of do the iris out animation. That was one of the really surprising things we discovered on the last stream. Then there's a frame immediately after that that clears all the text on the menu, leaving only the cursor. And then it has some code to like move that down. And then somehow it restores the original menu. I haven't actually looked into how that works. But yeah, it's an interesting mechanism. So in this version, all of that's been removed, and instead we're just working with those raw image assets. So that script we were working on in the last stream turned into this show file repacker.py. Oh yeah, the aspect correct resizing in CSS required a combination of one, just like switching my approach a little bit in a completely reasonable way, which was to just break down the problem into a few different steps and to break each of those steps into horizontal and vertical axes. And so that helped a lot. The other thing was this strange trick, which uses, it sets the padding on. It's actually not even that strange, actually. Yeah, nothing here is really that strange. It just required a bit of a change in perspective. I mean, I can show you how the CSS works, if anybody's into CSS, but I was gonna go through the image decompression first. So this is the function we wrote on the last stream. It opens these show files, which are the kind of RLE compressed movies that the original game had. So dist, I think we're on build. Yeah, so I've got the first step here from just having raw files from the original game is this check originals.py. So this takes hashes and locates the files we're interested in the original archives. So if you have, games off a floppy disk or in a zip file or whatever, you can just throw them in the directory. And it'll both verify that these are the right versions and put them into known locations. And the locations vary a bit depending on what we're doing with them. So these exe files are going to go through the binary translation. So these actually get disassembled and turned into C++ code. The show files are going into this show directory to be processed by this tool we're going to look at in a sec. And then everything in FS is stuff that gets packed into a virtual file system that gets included with the game itself. So then the show file repacker takes those two show files and uses this little smidgen of RLE decompression code to write them into like an 8-bit per pixel buffer. And then we use the Python imaging library, or in this case, the fork of it called Pillow, to just do like resizing and cropping and stuff like that on the original palletized image. So we're actually taking those compressed images and then repacking them without the frames that were just for the menu. And then this goes along with a corresponding change in, so there used to be BT menu and BT menu 2 to make like menu.exe and menu2.exe, but now we're actually renaming these to show.exe and show2 because now they're only being used for the cutscene. So yeah, as soon as these binaries initialize, we're going right to the actual cutscene code, and as soon as the cutscene ends, we transition right to the game, because we no longer need to worry about like reserving memory for a DOS shell or anything like that. We can just have this binary directly exec the next binary. Oh, where's my controls for dealing with spammers? Sorry, I had to mark some spam in the YouTube chat. All right. So, yeah, after unpacking these show files, we get some interesting goodies. So the way I've named these files that are show and show2, these are frames from show.show and show2.show, which were just split up onto disk 1 and disk 2. And actually, they're just two separate cutscenes. The first one is the cutscene for starting the game. The second one is the cutscene for finishing the game. Those are the only two cutscene animations the game has. And then I have these versions. The one without the C is just the frame itself on a transparent background. So in this case, you can see here that it's not writing the background, it's like skipping over the background and leaving it transparent. That color is just like the color of the file browser. The -C version is composited with a black frame buffer and then all of the frames so far. So this is more like what the game would actually see in memory after it's gotten to this point in decoding, whereas this is more like just what this particular frame has stored in the file, if that makes sense. So there's two different splash screen images. Then there's the menu. So the way this is actually encoded, it has to blank out the splash screen and then draw the menu on it. And then afterwards, the next frame, you see just the cursor. But the way that's encoded is this like inverse image of the menu. That's a good question. Leo's asking if my software modifies the original game files at runtime. I mean, it depends on what you mean by runtime, but like not while you're running the game, but while you're running the build scripts. So I have a lot of programs that you run during the build process to translate the original game files into other files. So I'm translating the code in the game into C++ code. For the most part, the data just gets included with that also, but this particular show file repacker is the first example of processing the game's graphics and then repackaging them too. So the result of this whole process actually is a modified version of the original show files, which has a bunch of these frames removed to avoid sending multiple copies of those to the, in the final distribution. And then the actual files we want, those actually get included in the HTML via this script and a Webpack plugin that turns them into a data URL. So I'll show that in a sec. So there's also some frames we can remove about disk management. So like these get removed entirely. This was from code I was removing from the menu anyway because I didn't need disk swapping. This menu right here, I will want some equivalent to this to be preserved, but like to be honest, this particular implementation of it was kind of bad, so like I didn't really feel attached to preserving this exact collection of pixels. But I I think what I'll probably do is, in place of that, once I do actually have a file load save UI, there'll just be some little like modal pop-up that lets you load a thing if you have a thing, or otherwise it just has a new game button that goes to the splash screen. So, and then the disk swapping was just, you know, I removed the disk swapping stuff entirely. So then there's frames from the actual animation. You can see even the first frame of this actually starts with a clear of this new game / old game screen. So like that was part of the animation when they were exporting this in whatever format this is. So then you can see it's, you know, just like cute RLE compressed animation frames. It's a lot like looking at the frames inside of a GIF file, if you've seen that. It's a similar set of compression techniques. GIFs are a little nicer for this than this format, because GIFs use LZW compression, whereas this uses RLE. So that was the first disk. Then there's show 2 on the second disk. It starts off with basically the same frames, but the delta compression is different because it doesn't have the splash screen before. There's the end cutscene. So yeah, so these show, the numbered files here are just like the raw things that I extracted, and then the script is also doing some additional processing. So yeah, it's repacking the show files. So then the ones that are included in FS, which is actually the file system that the game sees, these are not the original show files, but they're the kind of cut down versions that don't have the duplicate frames. Then we're reading some of those and then doing some cropping and pasting. And oh yeah, so this is something else I chose to do. In the previous version, you could actually see it claim to be version 1.1, and I don't think that's really true anymore, right? So like, this is the old version still. That v1.1, that's, I don't think I want to claim to be the original version at this point. So I don't know whether maybe eventually it would make sense to put some other little badge there, but I didn't really want to risk like disrupting the original kind of pixel art style of this, so I decided instead to just like remove the version entirely for the moment. So that's what you see if you reload the site now. There's this splash screen, and this splash screen just doesn't have a version badge. I think it looks fine that way, but I would like to have some way of getting the version in here eventually. So, what was the next step? Yeah, so after that, I'm writing these splash screens as splash 1 and splash 2. So these are actually still in kind of a weird format. You can see maybe that they're a little bit squished. They're like wider than they should be, and that's because this game uses rectangular pixels. There's a sort of weird resolution that I've been kind of standardizing internally, and that's 644 by 388. So that's what this frame is. The way you get that is you take 320 by 200, which is the CGA resolution we're using. But then you chop it down to 320 by 192, which is what the game is actually using, because the original Apple II version only had 192 scan lines. So all the graphics in this game are only 192 scan lines high. So it's doubled 192, which is 384. So 640 by 384. And then you add 2 pixels on each side for a border so that it blends nicely into the edges. And so that's what I've got here, 644 by 388. And yeah, so like some of the conversions behind that are all done at runtime, like that 4 pixel margin, that all gets put on between copying from the WebAssembly runtime its frame buffer to the canvas, so like it doesn't have to worry about the margin. But doing stuff on the JavaScript side, I do actually have to worry about the margin, so just little things like that. So 2 splash screens. Yeah, and then I'm actually trying to build menu graphics So this comment is a little bit out of date, actually. Yeah, when I wrote that comment, these were actually only 2 separate PNGs, and now they're just like a whole pile of PNGs. So I'm trying to separate the menu into pieces that I can easily reassemble and animate using CSS. So the cursor, just for simplicity, I'm just using that entire screen. So I'm not cropping it or anything like that. It's still lined up with the top left corner of the screen, but then I just move that down. It's a little bit weird, but was simplest all around. And then the menu itself, I'm actually splitting along each menu item boundary. And that's how I calculate the locations for the cursor later, and that's also how I get like click and mouse hover targets for the menu interaction. So these are actually just kind of painstakingly created by trying to figure out how the menu cursor best lines up on all the menu elements, and then kind of carving it into sections so that when you move the cursor to the beginning of each of those sections, it's lined up with the corresponding menu item. So the way that looks, so menu cursor is like this. It's transparent, but lined up on the top. And then I've got all these slices. And you would think, oh, that's terrible. Why are you putting them all in separate PNG files? There'd be so many separate network fetches. But that's part of why I put them in data URIs also. So all of this actually just gets inlined into the index HTML, and it's still under 20K. Oh, so maybe I miscommunicated. So like, it's not doing this patching at launch. This is when I build the project. So when you actually launch the game, you're not downloading like the original EXEs or anything. You're downloading a WebAssembly, you're downloading index HTML, you're downloading a big JavaScript bundle. Yeah, so I think I miscommunicated that to you. My intent was, in fact, not to be distributing the unmodified binaries, but to make this a derivative work. And to make, so like specifically, I wanted the actual code behind this to be something I can easily open source without any legal problems. So it's just like a BSD licensed program that's like all original work and doesn't contain any copyrighted stuff. But you run that with like a copy of the game, like off of your original 5 1/4 or downloaded from an abandonware site or whatever. And then that produces this combined work, which is then a derivative of the original game, and that's what your browser downloads. Which seemed like, you know, that wouldn't allow someone to use my service to just like pirate a copy of the original game if that was a thing. But it also just kind of makes sense from an efficiency perspective. Like, the thing I'm doing isn't writing an emulator. Like, the thing you're describing, if you want to just download the EXE, would be writing an emulator, which is a thing you can do. I mean, this game, I feel bad that this game doesn't run very well in DOSBox, and it makes me want to contribute to DOSBox, but I mean, that project hasn't had a release in so many years that's like, I don't know, maybe I'll just try to get this working in QEMU or MAME or something. Because yeah, part of the problem is that the DOS emulation has a bit of a blind spot for computers of this particular age. So like the XT keyboard stuff and some of the cycle timing, like in DOSBox, could be a lot better for this. Yeah, so like specifically my intent here was not to preserve the exact original experience, because that would be an emulator. And an emulator exists for a reason, and those are separate things, but that's not what this is. My intent with this was to make it like a port, like a remake, like a reissue, like, you know, like a remix, basically. That's kind of the land that I'm experimenting with here. Because, yeah, I mean, I think you know, the other things have been done all right. I mean, it would be nice to make the emulation work better, but I just don't know where to go there, because like I put out a series of patches that if you apply these patches to the game and then run it in an emulator, it runs great. But as far as I can tell, nobody cares. Like, the web is still full of people who just have unpatched versions of this game running in DOSBox, completely unusable, and no one cares to make this better. So like, if no one's gonna bother using my patched version or like contributing changes to DOSBox to make it run better or whatever, then I don't want to just like pour more effort into that. I want to do something that like actually has a chance to also modernize the game in some other ways. Like, I think being able to like load and save your game really easily, I think having, you know, support for running it directly on mobile with touch input, support for mouse input, like these are things that you would not find in an emulator, that you wouldn't want to find in an emulator really. But I think that's like what I wanted to aim for with this project. So I think the last thing here is the icon, and that's also kind of weird. I'm actually just cropping that out of the menu cursor and resizing it and putting a border on it. And there's just some like kind of slow Python code for generating the border. But yeah, it seems alright. And now I can actually use the original game graphics for that rather than something that I've had to custom draw. So then the next step in this chain is Webpack. So this generates some files. That gets invoked by the make file before running Webpack. But then once we're inside Webpack, the main HTML actually just can require those PNGs, just like you'd require a JavaScript module. And in this case, because they're under 8 kilobytes, we just get a data URL. So these all just turn into inlined images in the HTML. The CSS gets inlined up here, and that's why you can just save this and still get the splash screen working. There's some other stuff going on here too, though. So when you just open up the HTML, I've got a few layers up here that are used for achieving that aspect correct resizing, and some like input and positioning as well. Everything here that's marked layer is just kind of stacked on top of the frame using absolute positioning. And so at first, all the layers are hidden except for this splash layer, which has some CSS animations that play one after another. And then once the JavaScript loads, it can unhide the game menu layer and then start actually moving the cursor around. So the cursor here is a little bit separate. It's got this ID game menu cursor, and then everything else here has a choice if it's actually selectable or otherwise just one of these stack classes to indicate how tall it is. Yeah, so I don't know how much anybody cares about that. The JavaScript behind that, it's basically a state machine. I've tried having some more regularity behind this, but the state transitions actually are a little bit weird. And if I don't want to be, like creating and destroying these elements all the time, I have to think carefully about how to manage the CSS animation states in all these different transitions. So for example, you can reload this and just like immediately just like poke on the spacebar or click it or whatever, and then you get to the menu. And in fact, if you just, actually, once you're actually in the game or the innovation lab, actually, that's a different case to talk about, because then you're reloading an autosave. And so here we do actually have to show that loading spinner briefly while the WebAssembly compiles. But if I go back to the menu, if you press enter fast enough, you should actually be able to get to the loading spinner, but this computer might just be too fast at it. There we go, a little bit of loading spinner. It's much easier to do that on my iPad. But yeah, and then you've got this. I don't know, I feel like I'm just rambling on about this at this point, so if anybody in chat has questions or wants me to go deeper into this, I can go there. Otherwise, I might just go back to thinking about how to actually add gamepad input to this. So the input schemes right now, you've got the original keyboard input, which is arrow keys and shift plus arrow keys. You've got on-screen keyboard, which is useful on mobile. These have a simulated keyboard repeat too. The layout obviously needs to be like context sensitive and to understand what's going on in the game, but like this is what we've got so far. It's like something we should do soon, but I think gamepad is maybe a little bit higher priority. So yeah, and then we've got this emulated joystick, which also works on the menu. Tries to at least. So it'd be kind of cool if when you plug in a joystick, it would actually respond by letting you move around this UI, like as a visualization of what the joystick state is. But that's one approach we could take. It's also possible that just looks distracting, and another approach I can imagine being good is to just replace this entire horizontal row with a little thing that says joystick attached, maybe with a disconnect button or something. I can probably turn the sounds back on. Yeah, so I don't know, let me know what you think about the new splash screen and menu and all that. Like, I think it makes for a much smoother experience, especially on slower mobile devices. And I think it'll set the stage for some additional UI, like the loading and saving in the future. I think being able to use the up arrow certainly feels satisfying on this menu, and being able to use the mouse. Yeah. All right. So one thing I'm still trying to figure out how to reconcile is this Gamepad API is entirely based on polling. It doesn't give you events. It just lets you poll the current gamepad state. I don't know why it's like that. I mean, for a lot of games that might make sense, but like for any game where that isn't what you want, I don't know, it just seems like well, it leaves me with a couple of options. Like, I could just register, so backing up just a bit, right now, the way my whole input mechanism expects to be dealing with input is that anytime the input device state changes, I call a function on the engine to set the new state. There isn't like an underlying event multiplexer layer that lets you kind of select between the game, like the WebAssembly engine and the menu. Right now, the events are just getting broadcast both places by kind of special purpose code here. So like game menu.presskey, engine.presskey, etc. And game menu just knows not to do anything if you're not actually in the menu. And likewise, if the engine is loaded but there's no game running, then it won't be reading the keyboard. And I mean, the underlying reason for this, the game actually does have an input poller that it calls. On the C++ side, we have functions that get called to retrieve the next key, to pull the current joystick state, to check whether a key is in the queue, things like that. I just didn't want to necessarily go back and forth between the WebAssembly and the JavaScript super frequently, since that's like a somewhat heavyweight transition, and so I've been trying to really limit the number of times I go back and forth in a single frame. But that said, like, it wouldn't be too bad to move the joystick polling to JavaScript land. I think I could have a single, like update joystick state function or something that gets called once per joystick poll. So I could do that. I could also just kind of keep the engine API exactly as is, but then register an animation frame callback on the JavaScript side to check whether the joystick state has changed and if the joystick is connected and all that, and to generate events. So I'll have to think about that. One small question to maybe answer is to figure out if I did want to try to show the state of the joystick reflected in the state of the on-screen controls. So like when you move the joystick, the on-screen joystick moves. That's a library, and I need to see if you can actually do that with the library, or if I would need to make some modifications. All right. So yeah, nipple.js is the joystick library I'm using. I remember this having a ton of documentation. Trigger an internal event might be useful. Oh, yeah, actually, how hard would it be to just play with that? so sniffly today. I wanted to just play around with this in the JavaScript console. I'm not actually sure if I can get back to the joystick object from anywhere in there. I think we just want to look at the source code for this. Oh, so many directories. Yeah, it looks like this is what's taking input, like touch or mouse events, and converting them into a joystick event. And this seems to not have any... Oh, maybe this is it. Ah, never mind. But actually this points towards something else. Apply position might actually be what we want. I was thinking like, oh, this is only the input side. Then somebody else is listening to that event and converting it to graphics, like by modifying positions in the DOM. But I think this is what we're dealing with. What is U? Oh, U is for utils. Oh, and this is really low level. There's going to be no nice way to do this. How is that calculated? That seems pretty straightforward. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to keep it this way, but I think the first way to do this is to just pull the gamepad if we detect that one's attached. And then, you know, modify the DOM state as necessary. So we have navigator.getGamepads. Oh, do we have to pull for this? No, there's a gamepad connected event. Gamepad connected. Yeah, so I think what I do is when I get a gamepad connected event, I kick off a gamepad polling cycle, and then the gamepad polling cycles continue on their own as long as there's a gamepad attached. This whole file needs some refactoring. Navigator. So this will only get called at all if we get this gamepad connected event, so it shouldn't need to check whether get gamepads exists. think we just want this to use the first gamepad right now. There's a lot of room for improvement here, especially when there's a mapping system, but let's just try to keep this simple at first. So that's still I'll still get undefined. Yeah. So like the one case where this distinction matters is, let's say you plug in two gamepads. The game will start using the first one and ignoring the second one because that's in slot 0. Then you unplug the first one, now the gamepad is ignoring all gamepads, or the game is ignoring all gamepads. It should stop this polling, even though there's still that second one attached. If you were to either unplug the second one and plug it back in, or plug in another one, then that would, I think, reoccupy slot 0, and we would get the gamepad connected event. So I think in a simple world where I just want to support like the first gamepad, I think I can just subscript this 0. So we can just keep polling as long as that is a thing. Specifically as long as it's not false, or null, or undefined, or anything else that evaluates to false. I mean, the other way I could do this is to use the gamepad connected event to get the reference to the gamepad. Can I... Yeah, and then I can check this connected attribute. That's kind of nice. Yeah, let's change this a little so it's actually pulling an individual gamepad, and then we don't have to think about the. I mean, it would still act weird if you plugged in multiple gamepads because you'd end up with the two gamepads kind of fighting over events potentially, but it'd be no worse than what we've got right now with the on-screen joystick and the physical joystick. Something like that. So keep pulling it. This would also be a good opportunity to pass around a previous state for diffing anything we want to diff. Because since I do have multiple input devices here, like I don't want this to be constantly clobbering the state of buttons that are not pressed into the unpressed state. I only want it to take effect when the state changes. So I think I do want to just keep track of the previous buttons and axes. Does this get replaced with a new object each time? think this means it generates, it's like I kind of want the converse. It's like I want this to tell me that the object is different when it changes, but we could also just work on the event timestamp and then just, but I don't want to necessarily make it kind of per device. I think I want it to be like, you know, like if you're using the joystick, but then you're also using the keyboard, like I don't want that to be weird if I can avoid it. Like if you're using, or like if you're using the joystick for X, Y, but then using the on-screen button for the joystick button. Like I want stuff like that to work if that's possible. Oh, frozen array. Is this actually immutable? Because that would be cool. Oh, that's great. Okay. The buttons and the axes separately. Yeah. So now we'll give it the next, or we'll give this closure a copy of our current axes and buttons as the last axes and buttons. I think I need another refresher on JavaScript basics. What is, again, the difference between let and var? Right, because var is unintuitive. I shouldn't be using var anywhere, really. Yeah, I'm really used to the way block scoped languages work, so yeah, JavaScript var sure is weird. Come on. I was waiting for the first let yes. See, I already had a let just right here. It's like I was already in the habit of using them for loops, but was like sloppy about using them elsewhere. Let is kind of old school, like, reminds me of basic. Should check in the non-input changes here. Same thing, but for buttons. Alright, let's see if that works as we expect. The new incognito window is a really handy way of avoiding the caching. Alright. Oh. I thought I just pressed something. It's kind of hard to tell. Maybe the controller was briefly emulating a mouse and keyboard before Steam picked it up. Not sure how I can see what event listeners are set on the window. Oh, okay, we are getting a Gamepad event. Oh, we don't. Do we not actually start polling? We are polling. The Gamepad timestamp is not updating, which is weird. And it's still working in this other app, right? It is definitely still awake. Am I missing a step for how you get it to update? Yeah, maybe actually that object doesn't refresh unless I call get gamepads again. Oh yeah, huh. Okay, and there's a .index property, so I can replace that easily. All right. All right. In this case, I don't even need that. Starless on Twitch chat wants to know what other languages I use. Yeah, I guess I've written code in a lot of languages. I mean, you're seeing C++, JavaScript, and Python, and some assembly language in this project, but I also really like Rust. I didn't end up using any Rust on this project, but I've been using it on a different project. I don't know. Yeah, like Python and C++ and JavaScript and Rust are probably like the things I end up using the most. Curious if we want to strike up some conversation. You could always, I could always ask like what everyone's favorite programming language is. Get some bike shedding. It's like part of me doesn't want to, like, even if it optimizes out, I don't know if it will. I don't necessarily want to be retrieving that many properties. Like, according to the spec, this is a property, which means this is actually a function call. So I think I actually just want to retrieve that once and just keep it in this scope. I guess there's also hardware description languages. I've used Python for that a little bit, but yeah, I've barely touched VHDL. I'm mostly into Verilog for that. Okay, so when you first plug in the gamepad, all the values go from undefined to false, which is cool. These are some axes. Are these buttons? Where's my buttons? We've got axes. Oh, I think I need to be looking at something more specific than the entire button object. Because the button array doesn't just contain like true or false, it contains this object which can have pressure sensitivity info, which is cool. I think for my purposes right here, I'm just going to take the pressed value. Steam button, that's not what I wanted. No buttons. Yeah, I mean, we should be saving the initial snapshot here and then diffing relative to that. So like, even if there's a button held when you first see the controller, we wouldn't report on that until you actually press it again. This one doesn't do the console log. Or did only one of these get inlined? That's weird. It inlined the axis change, but not the button change. Okay, so it's like I can queue up a few axis change events and then kind of click through them in the debugger, and that's fine. Nothing for button change. If I hold down a button and then queue an axis change, I see that pressed. Why doesn't that trigger something down here? R. So A and R are the two arrays it's supposed to be comparing. We had true down here also. Yeah, you know, I wonder if the the issue here is that the axes, like, it's an immutable array, and the array is recreated each time, so I can use this object comparison and that works. But then the buttons, it's the same set of button objects, but then the individual button change state. So I think I need to actually just extract the pressed states into a different list. I mean, it's so silly. The buttons can be a single 32-bit number. Why don't I just get a single 32-bit number? Yeah, so one slight simplification here is let's treat the initial state as all undefined. So let's pass it two empty lists. And then anything that deviates from undefined will get an event when the joystick is attached, which I think is a reasonable behavior. And then that also means we don't have to compute the current state in two places. We can put that in another function, but this is just even simpler, I think. We could just use like a lambda and a filter or something like that. Or actually map. There's no like list comprehension thing in JavaScript now, is there? No, but that's pretty nice. I guess I could probably be using arrow functions more. I've been using these like old style functions because I haven't really been using this, and so that this capturing on the arrow functions hasn't been helpful, but I think it's still a nicer syntax, and I don't think there's a downside. Anyway. Is that paren actually not necessary? Oh, that's something new I learned. Does that return a new because like in Python, map returns like an iterable. This is actually an array. Okay, that's actually what I want. Yeah, this should be more what I want. Ah. Cool, so we got a bunch of buttons changing to false when the device first attached, and a bunch of initial access states. Some more access states, more button states. That's nicer. Oh yeah, Fidelio was pointing out NoOpCat, who's, NoOpCat's a great streamer. If you're interested in software streams on Twitch, yeah, her name's Suze. She streams a lot of stuff. I think a lot of like JavaScript, a lot of like game stuff, but then also like she maintains like an AVR programmer package, and so she works on that. She does like microcontroller stuff. Yeah, no, her streams are great. And then Starless is also asking how I run programs from the text editor and the terminal. I think it depends on what the program is written in. Because like the text editor is just a text editor, and the terminal, there's a lot to that, I guess, but it's really mostly for entering commands. So it sounds like what the question is getting at is that you need a way to compile or interpret or just otherwise run the program, and that just like really depends on what language it is. Usually there's a program that you pass the text file into as an argument. So for example, I have this program here. It's called showfile-repacker.py. And so if we just take a look at that, this is just a Python program. It says at the top, this is a sharp bang or a shebang line, you might hear them called, because this pound sign is often a sharp. In music nowadays, everyone thinks of them as hashtags, but sharp bang, and then bang is another name for the exclamation point. And then the rest of this is just part of a command line that's used for launching this program. So what that's saying is, to run this, I could run user bin env python 3, and then the name of the program, which is source showfile-repacker. And it's giving me an error because the way I wrote this program, it's also expecting a parameter, which is sysargv1. And so in this case, that's a directory that I'm processing. And so then the program runs. So like in this case, env is like a bit of a weird thing. That's just trying to locate Python 3 given your environment. If you're just running this on the terminal, you don't need that. That's kind of because this sharp bang has a slightly different kind of interpreting context than your shell actually does, and so the behavior that it's after is the default in the shell. So Python 3 in this case is the name of my Python version 3 runtime, and then the script, and then the parameter I'm passing to it. But because of that sharp bang line, you could even just run the name of the script, assuming the file is executable. That's like a bunch of stuff. Things depend on the operating system and the language. You can just type, if you spell it correctly, you can type Python and get a Python runtime. This is usually called a REPL, read, evaluate, print loop, or REPL. And that's useful, but if you have a file with some code in it, you can give that as a parameter to, say, Python. What do I have that's like a more standalone Python program? It's like a super old directory. Here's a really old program. Yeah, I don't know. what do I actually have on this computer that I use in my bin directory? It's a Ruby script and a couple of compiled binaries and something written in Go. Yeah, so like in this case, there's not a lot of just like running programs directly from the console that I'm doing. So usually when I start something in this project, I'm using a makefile. So like this thing that I was using over here, to run that I typed make hot serve, and in this case hot serve just selects something that I've already defined in my makefile as a make target, or like a build target. So what I'm doing here is I'm invoking the program make, which just knows to look for a file in the current directory called makefile by default. There are other things it can do, but this is the default and it's what most people do. And then this is like a little miniature programming language that's just for building other files. And so hot serve invokes this sort of like a recipe. I think they're even technically called recipes. And it says to do this, you need to build these first, which in this case is basically everything that I need to run or to build before running Webpack. So like all the WebAssembly and stuff like that. And then it just runs these two commands, just like if you were to type them on the shell, except it can replace variables. So this is just like running make dir. The @ just tells it to be quiet, to like not show the output, or not show the name of the command as it runs it. But then stuff like this, this is running a compiler, a C compiler, hence CC. But this is a variable that gets substituted up here with the name of the specific compiler I'm using. So like this is pretty common. I don't know if any of this is useful. I'm just kind of rambling again. All right, well I think, let's see, where are we? The gamepad input exists now, and we could potentially actually try to hook it up to some stuff. All right. So ideally I would like to actually have this have an effect on the existing UI. Like I don't want this to go directly to the game engine. I want it to like light up the proper buttons. Yeah, axes and buttons are really different for this. For axes, I think I'm gonna have to manipulate the position of the UI on this joystick object directly, which is a little bit dirty because there's no like stable API for that, but I don't really see a better option. This scaling is pretty specific to the on-screen joystick we have. I think I'd want to scale it a little differently. That's probably a fine place for that. I don't know why I have audio context set up here. I don't think that's actually gonna work. A bunch of the input events also trigger, making sure that the sound output is set up, because several browsers, I think iOS, Safari, and recent versions of Chrome will not actually let you create a sound device unless you do it from inside of a click event handler. So that's what that's for. Yeah. Really need to split up this file somehow, but right now I'm trying to figure out what the next step is. mean, I have been thinking this input module, like right now it's just this like flat JavaScript file that decorates the engine object, and it seems like it'd be great just to have a separate input object that is an event target that I can attach listeners to. I was thinking about these event listeners down here because I want the buttons to really have the exact same effect as calling these button event handlers. So like one thing I could do is this add button events. I could try to give this a parameter that would let you associate these with the joystick. Yeah, huh. Because like axes and buttons do seem like fairly different here. The axes, there's only one set. The D-pad is actually not treated as an axis set in the standard. They're treated as buttons, and that's actually pretty good for me because then I can reuse the button handlers for the arrow keys. Because I think I want the D-pad to act like the slow walk arrow keys for making precision movements. So then all the buttons here map pretty much directly to my button handlers. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is a great candidate to turn into like an event listener when I do that refactoring, but I think right now I'm going to do it this way. And the axes, I don't know if I want to split up the axes like this. So, like, if any of the axes have changed, I think I want to register that as a single thing. What did I call this on the other joystick? Joystick axes. Simple. Okay, so now that button mapping handler. So I have some optional and some required handlers. So I have like a press, a release, and a click handler that I'm setting for all these buttons. So button element, gamepad up button. So yeah, this, like everything that's going on in this wrapper for the most part is stuff that I don't want in the joystick handler. Maybe the mouse tracking end. Although the main reason for that is so that if you like move your mouse off the game screen and quickly just like hit a button, that's guaranteed to cancel the tracking. And then audio context setup is opportunistic right there, but I think right now I actually remember coming across an open bug in Chromium that you can't, like there's no way of getting, like initializing an audio context from a gamepad because those aren't considered to be user-initiated events. Alright, so if a gamepad button has been specified, I think we just want to register click on button up. I think those are the same as far as we're concerned. That might be enough to get this working if I actually add these parameters to all the button events. Okay, so this is like the joystick's main button. This is just any other keyboard button. I feel like these should, maybe these should all be HTML data. That's probably it, actually. Yeah. wonder if you can have underscores in there. I think that's all I need though. Oh gosh, parse int. Is that real? Yeah. Not a number always compares false. Oh hey Kitlith. Oh, stream's going alright. I'm kinda sick and sniffly, but I'm hacking around on adding Gamepad support to this Robot Odyssey port. Alright, this helps if I use the right gamepad. Is that? I think that might have been the old version. These controllers feel so similar when I'm not paying attention. Okay, that's better. Cool. So, gamepad buttons. And the next part can happen in the HTML. Let's give these gamepad mappings too. So that's remote, toolbox, cursor, and soldering. I think these others don't need hotkeys. Or don't need gamepad mappings. But then the D-pad. Where's our NIST standard gamepad here? Alright, so I've left. It's 14. Down is 13. Up is 12. Right is 15. And the same repeat rates will take effect for the gamepad buttons too. Oh, look at that. Oh, cool. So I could map that to spacebar pretty easily actually, but it seems better to map it to the actual joystick button. Oh, that's great. Remote control. Well, now it just needs axes. Cool. So the next part is to hook up Gamepad axes changed. Let's try to make the visual part of this work. Let's play with this in the debugger a little bit. Oh, that's what I was looking for. Sorry. Aren't you glad you're so far away that the germs can't reach you? Okay, so where's my joystick device? I thought nipple.js was going to initialize above this. The gamepad poll. Maybe it's moving that because it's not a declaration. Maybe all the declarations are happening first. Oh yeah, there it is. So nipple.js is U in this scope. Oh. Do I not? Oh, we might have overridden that in that scope because the compiler. Where did U come from? Yeah, I should probably have a debug build. But, you know, I kind of like reading packed code. Let's just take a breakpoint right down here where that initializes. Huh. U is an array. don't know why the joystick manager is an array, but maybe that's just how it constructs its objects. Like it's got the right numbers. And then this is a collection, I think. This is a little different than the impression I was getting from reading the source code, but maybe I just missed something. So front, back. Oh, let's just open this library in a separate editor. Alright, so this is what we're actually calling. This is not the manager itself. This is. I don't know why the instance of manager is called factory here, but manager is creating something. I think the thing we're actually getting is a collection. Yeah. Okay. And the collection is an array of some sort. So I had been looking at this process on move. And the apply position. And I was thinking about just setting the position directly on this front element. I was also noticing that I think there's like a color or opacity change that we need to do too. So what does process on start do? Oh, show. That might be what makes it brighter. Yeah. I'm not really sure if that's right. Let's see how badly that breaks. Front. It's interesting. Having two incognito windows trying to load at the same time seemed to be causing the hot reload to oscillate. Oh, it's still top there. No errors. Oh. So it's not fading out on its own. Need some way of doing that, but it seems kind of right. I need to make some more tea in a sec. So it's got some animation facilities. I just have to tell it when to hide and show. So I'm just going to make it hide when the joystick is close to centered. Oh yeah. Oh, that's too much. I think that's too much by twice. That's right, I was just getting diameter and radius backwards. That's better. This is pretty much what I wanted. Huh. I think that's too sensitive. I can't seem to go slowly. It seems like it's only got one speed. Oh, I think I'm getting my units confused. 127? I think these are in game engine units. Alright, that looks fine. I should be doing this clamping in the joystick axis function though. Oh, right, this limit is actually huge. That's right, the range I'm using is much smaller. This is just to keep it from overflowing. a little high. I think maybe 16 is closer to the actual number. That's better. I think this is one large block per frame, which is, I think, the fastest you're allowed to move. It seems comparable. Cool, so I can toggle my remote with the second button. That still feels a little fast. Maybe we could try using the same scale as the on-screen joystick, but that was intended for, like, that one you go beyond that circle and the circle is 1, whereas this one the limit is 1. So I'd expect to want the scale to be slightly higher here. Let's try 10. If I had like a more of a system for configuring settings, like this would be a good setting. But right now I'm just picking good defaults. So that's kind of nicer. Yeah, this is nicer. So what if you wanted... So one thing that I'm concerned about is I actually don't want this to overlap the screen. So the size, I think I want this to be somewhat smaller. Because like, when you're using this normally, it overlaps the screen a bit, and that's fine because your thumb is also on that same location. But like if I'm using it full screen on a landscape monitor, like this, then you can end up with that kind of sticking out a little bit, which is not what I want. Let's change that. What are some of the sizes I do have here? It might be easier to get the size out of the JavaScript side of it. This to options, that size. That's better. Yeah, this is great. This game is really nice on an actual gamepad. Almost like it was designed for this. Do I have the soldering iron? So I have joystick button, remote, toolkit. This is cursor. And there's solder. It's almost like I want those to be the shoulder buttons. Actually, I think I want one button that toggles between cursor and solder. But maybe that'll come in the next change, because that requires looking at a little bit of game state. For now, I think I'm just going to put them on shoulder buttons. I keep closing the windows with the references I need. Yeah, let's use 4 and 5. Let's do a little bit of cross-browser testing and then push this and then do something else. Like that thing with the toggling. Ooh, this is a little crunchy. Like, at least looking at this, it's not updating especially smooth. Let's see how it is in the game. The keyboard, or the mapping is really weird. Right? We knew to expect this problem. Is any of this... Alright. I mean, this is not breaking in unexpected ways, but it would need some mapping changes to be useful. Alright, let's try Safari. I'm reloading it once and then closing the window and loading it again to get around the cache. Yeah. This is more broken than I expected it to be. Oh, am I still... Do I still have like a debug print somewhere? Huh. It's interesting that it shows you the canvas content separately. That's actually pretty handy. are we even using the service worker here? Oh, that's interesting. Now it's working. Maybe I hadn't pressed the right buttons before. Let's try that again. So without pressing buttons, it doesn't get axes. If I just mash a few buttons though, that actually works, even though the button mappings aren't perfect. The most important buttons are fine though. It seems alright. This mapping is not quite right on Safari, so I can't use the D-pad, but on Chrome, where the mapping is correct, I can use the D-pad. Oh, this is the non-incognito mode Chrome, so it's using an old version. That's better. There's no escape on the gamepad, but there's my solder. Oh, maybe I should map escape to like the back button. It's like 8 in the standard layout. Add that to the data for that button. So this is how I'm doing all the input mappings with HTML data. Yeah, escape works now. Oh, I don't have enter. I guess the counterpart there could be enter 9. And help? Is there a good place for help? I mean, that really doesn't need to be on the gamepad, does it? Maybe that could be like 6 or something. Yeah, so that's the help button now. Let's enter, escape. Cool, so you can navigate the main menu and back using the joystick now. if you know what the mapping is. All right. Okay, what about a soldering iron / cursor toggle? That seems like a good thing to do. I could also do a deployment with that code that I just did. Yeah, let's deploy what we've got while we think about what to do next. My reminder / script for how this works. All right. So right now, moving the joystick doesn't ungrab the mouse. So if you still have the mouse cursor in there, you can just kind of trade off between the two, which might be useful. The lack of motion at the very low end in the joystick is frustrating, and I mean, that's been a problem with the on-screen joystick as well as this, and I think I'm going to have to fix that by modifying the joystick processing slightly so that I can move slower than the slowest that the game normally supports, which is this fast. That's not very slow, that's just 1 pixel per frame, right? And I think that worked out all right in the original game, because the original frame rate was a little bit slower than what I'm running it at now. But it's like kind of frustrating having the granularity be either stopped or 1 pixel per frame. So one way I could solve that is in the joystick polar, I can keep track of like what is the minimum motion that actually, or the minimum value that actually produces motion. I think I've already established that for the purposes of the mouse feedback loop. And then if I would be going slower than that, then instead I have like a little accumulator deal that kind of rounds it either up or down and then saves an error term for future frames. Oh, that's a good question from Twitch chat asking if I can do controller vibration. I don't know if the Gamepad API supports that, but let's check. I mean, didn't see anything for vibration feedback in here. Yeah. It's a pretty basic gamepad interface. There's the D-pad going kind of slow, but it's similar to this, right? But then you can click individual pixels, which is kind of handy. Alright, so soldering versus not soldering. Oh, these are just hot reload errors. Okay, get game memory. Okay, so there are a bunch of 256 entry arrays. The first one here is a linked list. I think the second one here is actually the object ID. So we should see this change when we go back and forth between soldering iron and player. Yeah. So what about other cursor states? Like there are more cursor states in the lab here because we've got hot cursor and paintbrush. Yeah, so I think the regular cursor, you can distinguish hot cursor and regular by the color. Oh. That's the room. I think 7. Oh. I should just look at my notes. Color is at 200. Yeah. I mean, it seems like regardless of the other states you've got here, so you've got like paint and solder and cursor and hot cursor, it seems like you always want solder to toggle between soldering iron and something else. So I'm thinking, I don't know, this is like a deviation from how the game was initially designed, but I'm thinking that the equivalent of like pressing S should toggle. Even if that's not actually like something I do to the way S is handled, there should be a way to bind a button to the action of toggling the soldering iron. I'm also thinking about how that ties in with this, like, I guess how literal do I want to keep this with regard to it being a keyboard versus it being game commands? Let's just test the deployed version, because I don't think I've done that yet. All right. well, actually, I think this might be a good stopping point for the stream. I think I need to think about how to implement this next part, and I'm also just like kind of sick and I need some tea or something. But yeah, that's like some basic gamepad support. Could be better, could have some remapping, could have, you know, some additional functionality, but it's not too bad. And like the features I think are at least somewhat discoverable since this actually lights up the UI. Alright, well, let me know how that works out for you if you're interested in this kind of thing. I think that's about it for me today. I will see you all next time, and thanks so much for joining. Special thanks to all my patrons who help make this possible, and I really appreciate everyone who hangs out and you know, participates in this sort of electronics and software thing that we're doing here. Let me know what you think. I will see you folks next time. Maybe Tuco will be around some more. Later.